Hello people! Today we're going to be drawing a super cute little fire friend, and all you need to follow along this tutorial is your favorite digital art software. I'm going to be using Procreate, as well as any drawing brush that you know you're comfortable with. And just a little heads up, there is going to be a giveaway in this video, so make sure you stay tuned for that. If you don't know me, my name is Genevieve, and my goal here on this channel is to teach you all about illustration and design. So if you're new, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of the weekly videos, and so that you can join our wonderful creative community. Now with that said, grab your drawing tools and let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do here is setting our background color to a super dark brown, and then we're going to draw the little fire friend. Now, if you want to follow along and use the exact same colors I will be working with in this video, you have a couple options. The first one is downloading the free color palette that comes with this video. And this palette is actually part of a freebies bundle, which is called the Procreate Jumpstart Kit, but honestly, all the freebies in there pretty much can work with other software. So there is color palettes, there is brushes, there are templates, cheat sheets, a whole lot of really fun things, paper textures as well. So if you want to check out that bundle and grab it for yourself, again, it is completely free and it is linked in the description below. So that's option one in terms of getting the exact same colors as I will be using. Otherwise, if you don't feel like grabbing a bunch of free stuff, that is totally okay as well. I'm always going to add the hex code of the color I will be using right here on the top right. So you could just take that code and input it in your color selector. And obviously here you can use any canvas size of your choice. I'm going with, I think it's 2048 pixels by 2048 pixels because this is just a demo. I want to keep it pretty small, but you could go with any size of your choice. If you're not exactly sure how to pick a canvas size, I do have a video in which I'm going to teach you everything you need to know in order to make a decision. So I will link that in the description below as well. Now, no matter which canvas size we're using, we're going to start by setting the background to a really nice burgundy, dark brown kind of color. And for that, you have, again, a few different options depending on which software you're using. If you're using Procreate, there's always a background color layer that comes within any canvas that you create, so you would just go ahead and tap on that. If you're working in a different software than Procreate, you would just create a new layer, making sure it is at the bottom of the list, although we don't really have anything else right now, so it's automatically going to be at the bottom of the list. And you would just rename the layer to background and then drop your color onto it to fill the entire space. Again, I am working in Procreate, so I'm just going to select the background color layer that comes with the app. And if you are working with the color palette, we're going to pick in this dark brown column here, the second option right here, which as you can see is a nice red in terms of the hue, which is pretty much 2/3 of the way in terms of saturation, which is really, really quite dark, but not all the way into the black. Great, now that we do have our background, we're going to move on to drawing the fire, which is going to be super simple. We're drawing this very basic cartoonish fire shape. So for that, go ahead and create a new layer and rename that new layer to fire. And here I'm going with a traditional orangey yellow fire, but you could also have a blue flame if you want a more magical or very intensely hot flame. No matter which color you're using for your flame though, I really recommend going with something super saturated and quite bright. So if we're working with a normal orange-yellow flame, we're going to start with this orange right here in the color palette at the very bottom of this column. And in terms of brushes here in this video, I'm always going to give you a few different options depending on what you're working with. So I'm always going to suggest free Procreate options that you can use and get really great results. This video, we're probably just going to use 1 or 2 brushes. We're really not going for anything fancy. So whatever you have would work here. But again, yes, free Procreate brushes. Then if you're working in a different software, I'm going to try my best to give you alternatives or tips to find alternative brushes that would be similar to what I will be using. And last but not least, I'm also going to suggest brushes from my Ultimate Illustration bundles. Now, these brushes are not essential at all, but they can help you get maybe a little bit more professional results, and people seem to really like them. So if you do want to check these brushes out, they will be linked in the description below, and there's always a special promo code for the YouTube people, but again, not essential at all. So here essentially we're just going to be looking for a brush that has a tiny little bit of texture within it, but not too much, so that we can still use that brush to create outlines and silhouettes. So that means probably going for a pencil brush. If you are working with Procreate, a free alternative would be in the sketching pack. Oops, so a pack that comes with the app. probably the HB pencil or the 6B pencil. Honestly, both of those would work really, really well. If you are working in a different software, really anything that has pencil in the name should work really well. Or any brush that you know you like and you're comfortable with. Again, this is not about a specific brush at all. So whatever you would reach for whenever you're creating an illustration for yourself could work really well here. Now in my case, I think for this video, I'm actually always going to use one specific brush, which is part of my illustration bundle in the texture pack. The sketching brush. I know it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to just use that one brush for everything, but I've been really liking it lately. I just think it's super soft and smooth, so that's the one I'm going to use. Now, as for the size of the brush, I personally don't really find that to be something super useful to give you because the brush size depends on so many factors. So there's nothing like just testing to see which brush size you have and then playing with that as you go. And then we're just going to try and draw the basic shape of our fires, starting with just a small rough circle. Now to make it look like a flame, we're going to add the traditional flame curvy pointy elements on the top. And those you can really easily customize them to make the flame your own. I'm just going to draw two very simple curves. So as you can see, it's kind of this S shape or S curve doubled. Super simple, nothing fancy. So I'm going to start by drawing a fairly long one at the top, and then a shorter one on the other side. Now to make the fire look super friendly, because after all we're drawing a fire friend, I'm also going to add essentially two more of these flame, whatever you would call them, these little points. And I'm going to draw those on the sides to make them look like arms. So these are going to be slightly less pointy, well, quite a bit less pointy, and they're both going to be the same size. So it's going to look a little bit more like this. At this stage, you could go ahead and just drop in your color to fill in your shape, but I personally want to build a bit of texture, so I'm actually going to just increase the size of the brush and fill in the outline manually. From there, we're going to add a bit of a color variation to create some sort of a gradient within this flame, starting with a darker red on the top of the flame and then moving into a really pale bright yellow in the very middle. So again, if you're using the color palette, it's going to be pretty easy. We're just going to start by picking the red, which is right here. Otherwise, we're just going to keep the same brush, still probably small to medium size, and we're going to come over the top and outline the flowy flames pointy shapes. I have no idea how to call those, but those two elements. And we're going to use that red to help separate the arms from the body as well. So just following the curve of our initial circle. Doesn't need to be the exact same as the initial circle, but just remembering roughly what that looked like. And then we're going to fill in the top of the flame pointy shapes. And the idea here is to have a brush big enough that you don't see too much of the brush strokes, but not too big so that you can actually stay within the shape. Now from there, as I mentioned, we're just going to keep adding more colors, going from orange to yellow this time. And I actually feel like I brought my red a little bit too close to the middle, so I'm just going to color pick the orange that I used, make my brush super big for this, and just bring it back in a tiny little bit, or just, yeah, smoothing that gradient a little bit, I guess. Now from there, for real, we're going to go back to a yellow this time. So in the color palette, we're going to go to the one right above the orange. Now we're going to take this color and we're going to place it towards the middle of our flame in more of a circular shape this time. Now if you want, you can also carefully extend it onto the arms. Making sure that you keep that little dividing line that we have between the body and the arms. Great. And then we're going to come in with an almost white yellow, so this kind of banana, you know, the flesh of the banana color, which in the color palette is at the very top of the first column. Just focusing that color towards the bottom middle of your flame. Awesome. Now while we have this color, we're going to draw some outlines and bright elements around the flame before we change the color to draw the facial features. Now these elements, we may want to go ahead and draw them on a separate layer so that we can apply something called a blending mode. Now if you're not familiar with blending modes, don't worry, I'm going to explain what they are in just a second, but we're going to start by creating a new layer first. So new layer, making sure it is above the fire. And we are going to rename that layer to fire, I guess fire details. You do not have to apply a blending mode if you don't feel like it, or if you have no idea if you do have blending modes in your software or how to use them, but they're really quite common, so you should be able to find them. Usually they are located with the opacity of your layers. And essentially what they do is they take whatever colors are on the layer, and then they blend those colors with the layer underneath, either by making them darker, lighter, or just completely different colors. So to create the light effect of our fire, this brightness and this super intense light, we are going to apply a blending mode onto the fire details layer so that the details really pop no matter what's underneath them. So the blending mode we're going to use here, well, we have a few different options, but one that is really common and I think looks super good for super intense lights like fire is the blending mode add. So in Procreate, the way to find blending modes is just tapping on the little N next to the check mark, which is going to pull up your opacity slider. But not only the opacity slider, you're also going to find this list right here with a bunch of weird names, which are blending modes. And so the blending mode we're going to use here is add. Now you could go with something like screen, probably color dodge as well if you do not have add in your software, but again, add is pretty basic, so you should be able to find it. Now again, if you cannot find add, don't worry about it, you do not need to use blending modes because we're going to be working with a super bright color anyway. You could maybe make this banana yellow even brighter, so adding more white to it to compensate for that. But otherwise, if you do have blending modes and if you can find add or screen or color dodge, we're going to start by just lowering the opacity of the layer a little bit so we have a better idea of what we're doing. And once we're done painting these details, we're going to bring the opacity back up or down depending on the effect that we want. So for now, I'm just going to set my opacity at 50%, roughly. So here, since we're drawing details, obviously we're going with a smaller brush than just the biggest size we have, so probably small to medium. Once more, just make sure you test it out before you start. There's nothing like testing. And then once you find something you like, we're just going to start by outlining the entire flame with this super bright color. Now while you're working on that, let's talk a little bit about the giveaway. I'm going to keep this pretty short here in the video, but all the details are going to be in the video description. Essentially, the prize you can win in this giveaway is any brush bundle of your choice from my store. And the way to enter the giveaway is super simple. All you have to do is wait for the secret password, which I'm going to add later in the video. Super easy to find. I'm going to literally write secret password on the screen with the secret password. And then you just leave a comment with that word as well as which brush set you would like to win in the video comments below, as well as on Instagram. Now again, all the rules, the instructions, the dates are going to be in the video description, so make sure you check that out, and make sure you stay tuned to find the secret password. I'm changing my mind. I think I want mine a little bit thicker after drawing them. I feel like they're not intense enough, so I'm just going to go over really quickly and draw them again. Now to make it look a little bit more like fire, we're also going to add some extra lines both outside and inside of the flames that are going to follow the curvature of, well, the flame. So these you can really draw them wherever you want depending on the shape of the flame that you have in your piece. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the inside. And to balance the fact that there's an extra one on this side, I'm going to add an extra one on the inside on the left side. Now, once you have these details mapped out, as I mentioned, we can always go back and just play with the opacity of our layer. I feel like mine right now, they're not as intense as I would like them to be. So just opening your layer panel once more, tapping on the now little A or other letter next to the check mark of your fire details layer, and just adjusting the opacity as desired. So here, this is really a question of personal preference, what you go with. I think I'm going to set mine, let's go with around 80%. And then from there, the last little thing we have to do for our little fire friend before we can move on to the lantern and the glow effect, which are both going to be really fun and quite easy, is we just need to add the facial features. And these can be very easily customized. I'm keeping mine super simple. I'm going to draw 2 small round dots for the eyes and then this huge, almost flat mouth that I think just looks super cute. But you could have a completely different emotion for your character if you wanted. So just changing, you know, the mouth shape, maybe adding some eyebrows if you wanted. You could go with different kinds of eyes. It's super easy to completely transform the piece here by just changing the facial features, which are super, super basic. Now, no matter what you want to draw for your facial features, we're going to draw them on a separate layer so we can move them around if needed. So just create a new layer above everything we have so far and rename that new layer to facial features. For the facial features, to make sure they really pop, we're going to use a super dark color. So in the color palette, it is, oh my gosh, it's super hard to see. You're gonna have to trust me. It is to the very right, so right next to this brown color, right here. And as you can see, it is essentially a orange, like a burnt orange, that is super, super, super dark, but not quite black. Otherwise, same brush, but quite a bit smaller, so you have a lot of precision. You can draw whatever you want, again, for your facial features. You could have closed little eyes like this to make your fire look super happy, or in the opposite direction, so just these basic U shapes to make your fire look super peaceful. But I'm gonna go with just 2 little beads. And then a long smile in the middle. And since we drew these facial features on a separate layer, again, it's super easy to move them around if needed. For example, I feel like this smile, I like the shape of it, but it's slightly crooked. So instead of redrawing it, what I could do is use any selection tool. So in Procreate, this one right here. And then drawing a selection around the element I want to move. And then using an arrow tool to move it, maybe rotate it. Oops. I'm gonna deactivate these settings right here so I can move it freely. Now you can definitely take more time for your facial features. I'm going to give you more time in just a second, but I want to show you the last little thing we're going to do on the fire first, which is going to be adding some little cheeks to really make it extra cute. And these cheeks, we're going to draw them back on the fire details layer so that they're the exact same colors as well, the fire details. So if you have a color history, the color should still be in your history because it's the one we just used. In my case, it is right here. But otherwise, if you don't have a color history, it was this super bright banana flesh yellow kind of thing. And then you can just use that color to add little cheeks below the eyes, slightly off to the side. So it's just very simple, small, flat ovals. And if you want the eyes to pop even more, you could also just outline the top. Probably not if you have closed eyes, but if you have big or round eyes like I do, that's definitely an easy way to just bring them to life even more. So feel free to pause the video here if you need more time to work on your fire friend. Otherwise, we're all going to meet up in the next chapter, which is going to be drawing the lantern. Great, so the lantern itself is also something you can very easily customize just by changing either the color or the shape. Now I'm going to show you a pretty traditional lantern, but you could have something a bit more modern, so simplifying the shape, or something even more fancy by adding more swirls and stuff like that. And we're just going to start by mapping out the glass part of the lantern, which in my case is going to be this almost teardrop shape around the flame. So go ahead and create a new layer above everything we have so far still, and rename this new layer to glass. Now because glass is transparent, we are going to lower the opacity of this layer, and we are going to lower it probably around 10% to start with, although we might come back and play with it once more later. And here we're just going to go with an almost white version of this banana color, which I haven't put in the color palette, but I'm going to add it, so I'm just going to go ahead and select it real quick. So same hue, really quite desaturated and still fully bright. This kind of white yellow, and I'm going to add it right here in the color palette. Now still with the same brush, we're going to start by drawing the outline and then filling it in just like we did for the fire. And actually I'm realizing here you're never going to be able to see what I'm drawing in the video, so I'm just going to increase the opacity of my layer a little bit, probably around 26 for now, but again, that's just so you can see it. In your case, you can keep it as low as 10 or 15. So really here, draw any shape you want. If you're enjoying this tutorial so far, please consider giving the video a like and subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. Now I know everyone on YouTube is asking you to do that, but believe it or not, it is a super great way to support your favorite creators because it essentially tells YouTube to take the video and just show it to more people. So thanks for helping. And just like for the flame, once you do have the outline of the shape, you're just going to fill it in. In my case, I'm going to do that manually once more so that I can keep building the colors. Or the textures. Now this step is super easy, we're just drawing a flat shape, but it is worth it to take the time to make sure you're happy with your shape before moving on to the next step. So feel free to pause the video here if you need, of course. Now, once you're happy with your glass shape, we're going to build the metallic part of the lantern, so top and bottom. Again, these elements can completely change based on the type of lantern you want. So for example, you could have a glass part that is just cylindrical instead of bulging like this, and you could just have a straight top and bottom, super modern, super cute. I'm going for something a bit more traditional, so I'm going to add this ornate top and then just a straight bottom. No matter which style we're going for though, go ahead and create a new layer still above everything and rename that new layer to Lantern. I'm just going to go with a slightly lighter version of the background so that we can see the lantern because it's cool, but the lantern itself doesn't distract from the fire, which should be, in my mind, the focal element of this piece. So if you're working with the color palette, we're going to pick at the top of this brown column. And here we're going to outline, just like we did for the glass and the flame, the shapes we want to use, and then we're going to manually fill them in. So the bottom shape I'm going to go for is this kind of rounded rectangle. So I'm just going to start by mapping out the height of these shapes. And then I'm going to draw a slightly curved bottom and a slightly curved top, overlapping a little bit with the glass, but not the fire. Once more here, make sure you take the time to refine the shape as desired. So as you can see, super simple base. Now the top is what I'm going to have be a little bit more ornate. It's going to look like a very thin, flat bucket hat. So a slight curve that goes upwards. And I feel like you can't really see super well what I'm drawing here, so I'm gonna go with a lighter version just so you can see it better, a lighter version of that color that is. But don't change yours, keep it as it is. It's really just because I want to make sure that you can see it well on the screen, and later down the road when I have done mapping out everything, I'm just gonna set it back to the original color, so this one right here. So the top, if you want to have the same shape as me, we're going to split in 3 sections. One that looks like a super thin, flat bucket hat, a simple cylinder, and then one that looks like a flying saucer. So the bucket hat's really simple. You're just going to start by drawing this upwards curve. And then you're going to use 2 slanted S shapes. So this kind of shape. And then you're just going to connect the top to close the bucket hat shape. Now on top of the bucket hat, we're just drawing a cylinder, so just 2 vertical lines, nothing fancy at all. And then we're going to close the shape with our flying saucer, so 1 more slightly curved line, which is using the same kind of curve as the bucket hat did. And then you're going to connect the top of that using a semi-circle kind of curve. Then all we're missing is a little button at the top, just like that. And with that, it is time for the secret password. So if you've watched this far in the video, please go ahead and leave a comment with the word flame. Now, not only is the secret password your way to enter the giveaway, it is also something that gives me a lot of information into how to edit and paste my videos better, which helps me create better tutorials for you. So again, if you've watched this far, just leave a comment below with the word flame, and then we're going to keep going. Great. Now I feel like I actually went a little bit overboard. This shape I think is too big, but again, not a problem because it was drawn in a separate layer. You can just use a selection tool to select the shape and then resize them as desired. So once more, feel free to pause the video here if you need a little bit more time to work on your lantern shape. And once you're done with that, we're going to add a little bit of a handle, and then we're going to move on to drawing outlines to really make the lantern come to life. The handle, I want it to be behind the lantern as it is right now, so it doesn't come in front of the flame. So if you want to do that as well, super simple. All we're going to do is we're going to create another layer that we're going to put below everything we have so far, except for the background, of course. So we're just going to do exactly that, new layer, putting it below everything. And this one you can rename it to handle or really whatever. And here I'm going to keep the handle super simple. So I'm just going to draw these 2 round shapes right under the top section, kind of touching the glass. And then I'm going to connect those circles with a slanted U shape that goes roughly towards or roughly down to the middle of the lantern. And when I say connect, I'm going to connect the insides of both of those circles. So essentially it's going to look kind of like this. Great. Now once we do have the lantern shape, we are going to draw some outlines around it to make it, again, just a little bit more crisp. But so that we see the outlines well, we're just going to jump ahead a tiny little bit and we're going to start working on the background just by adding a tiny bit of a gradient. So go ahead and create a new layer below everything you have so far, even the handle, and rename that new layer to Orange Glow. Again, in the next chapter, we're going to add even more lights and glow, but this is really just the most basic one so that we can see what we're doing a little bit better. And for that glow, we're just going to use the same base orange color that we used to start with the flame. So in the color palette, it was this one right here. And the goal here with this orange is just going to be drawing a circle pretty much around the entire glass area, because the glass area is what is transparent, and so that's what would let some light out. And then you can just very quickly fill it in. Now to make it look a little bit more like it's actually glowing, we're going to add some blur. Now in most software, you should be able to find something called Gaussian blur, but if you cannot find something called Gaussian blur, just go with any blur tool you have. That's going to work perfectly fine. In Procreate, blur is in the adjustment panels, little magic wand icon right here at the top. And you can see in this middle section, we have Gaussian blur at the top. So you can just tap on that. And then if you swipe your finger towards the right, it's going to add blur. And if you swipe it towards the left, it's going to reduce the blur. So here we want something medium in terms of blur. We don't want to have it completely disappear, but we don't want it to be looking like a pumpkin either. So I'm probably going to go with 48. There we go. And then once you have that blur, we're going to go back to just working on the lantern. Again, that was kind of us getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, working on the background. And these outlines, we're going to draw them on a separate layer so that later we can come back and add some shadows on the lanterns without the shadows interfering with the outlines. So go ahead and create a new layer above everything we have. Rename that new layer to Outlines. And here you're just going to pick a really dark version of whatever color you used for the lantern. So if you're working with the color palette, we're actually going to go with, at the very bottom of our column right here, it's super hard to see, but it's a really, really intense burgundy red. It's the exact same base color as the lantern, and it is almost fully saturated and almost fully dark. Otherwise, it's going to be very similar to what we did for the flame outlines. We're just going to outline the shape of the lantern, but we are not going to outline where the handle is going behind the glass. We're going to outline everything else, but not that part, because again, it is behind the glass, so it should be a little bit less precise and sharp. Now, if you have the same kind of shapes as I do for the top, we're just going to outline the different shapes we used as well. So outlining the top of the bucket hat. And outlining the bottom of the flying saucer as well. You can also add extra lines, like maybe I'm going to add a line in the middle of the bucket hat. Why not? But maybe it's not going to go all the way to the middle. You can really experiment here, just maybe adding a few details to make the piece a little bit more refined. Now the handles here, again, one little thing you could do to refine them a little bit is adding this kind of spiral in the middle. And then the base in my case is going to be pretty uneventful because it's just this very basic rounded rectangle. So once more, take all the time you need to finish drawing your outlines, changing the shape of the lantern if you want, and then once you're ready, we're going to move on to the final chapter, which is going to be adding some lights and shadows, as well as just amplifying the glowing effect a little bit more, really to make the piece pop so much more. Awesome, so at this stage, we're ready to start shading the lantern and then adding some glowing particles everywhere. Well, not everywhere, but around the fire. And we're going to start by just giving a bit of shading to the lantern before we move on to the glass, because it is super easy, but it's completely going to transform the lantern. So for that, go ahead and select the lantern layer. And here, if you want to make your job a little bit easier, you can activate what is called alpha lock on the lantern layer. So in Procreate, the way to do that is just take 2 fingers and swipe your layer towards the right, or just go from the layer menu, so just tapping on the layer and selecting alpha lock from the menu. And now alpha lock, what it does is whatever we draw on the layer when it is activated is going to stay within the colors or the shapes that were already there. If you do not have alpha lock in your software, don't worry about it. You're just going to need to be a little bit more precise and stay within the limits. And here, what we're going to do is we're going to go with a slightly darker version of that base color, not quite as dark as the outlines, of course, and then we're just going to draw some super simple shadows. So if you're working with my color palette, the color we used for the base of the lantern was the one at the very top, and then the outline was the one at the very bottom of this column. So for the shadows, we're just going to pick the one in the middle. Again, it's super hard to see, and it probably looks like it's the exact same as the one at the bottom, but trust me, it is a little bit different. As you can see, there's a little bit more brightness and a little bit less saturation. And then we're going to put those colors towards the bottom of the different sections we have. So one thing to remember here is the light in this piece is coming from the fire, our little fire friend here. And so elements that are pointing towards the fire are going to have lights, and then elements that are either far away from the fire or have something between them and the fire are going to get a shadow. So for example, we have here this little cylinder on the top, but between the fire and the cylinder, there is this bucket hat here, which means the bottom of the cylinder is not going to be getting really a whole lot of light. So you can just go ahead and draw a super simple shadow, starting from the bottom of that cylinder and creating a gradient until or towards the top of the cylinder. So same thing here in my mind with this little button. The bottom section of the bottom is not going to receive a whole lot of light, so I'm just going to create the same kind of gradient right here. And also same thing in my mind, this bucket hat, there's kind of this ridge that is going outwards. So the ridge going outwards is preventing this section from getting light. So once more here, I'm just going to create a soft gradient to add a bit of volume to the lantern. Now, if you feel like your gradient is not exactly how you want it to be, don't worry about it for now. We're going to draw the bottom and then we're going to come back and just smooth everything in, so not a problem. But before we do that, because we have the right color, we're just going to do the base, which in my case, super simple. I'm just going to add a very simple gradient from the bottom towards the top of the base. Great. Now, if you feel like some of your gradients are not smooth enough, super easy. What you can do is just go back to the base color you used and then use it over your gradient to help smooth them in a little bit. Awesome. So once you do have your shadows, we're going to move on to adding some lights on the lantern. Again, super simple, but it's going to help make it pop a whole lot more from the background. And you could keep these lights on the same layer as what we have so far, but I'm going to separate them just because. So if you want to do that as well, go ahead and create a new layer above the lantern, but still below the outlines. And rename that new layer to Lantern's Light. And because it is a separate layer, actually, it's going to allow us to lower the opacity of that layer to have the lights blend a little bit better with the lantern itself. So we're going to go ahead and do that. For now, we might set it to 50%. Again, something roughly in that region, but we can always come back in and play with that opacity later once we have the lights mapped out and we see what we're doing a little bit better. And these lights, we're going to just draw them in the same base orange we used with the fire, because the fire is what is lighting up the piece, which means just going back to our base orange. You can either color pick it. For that, you would need to hide the glass though, or just going back in your history or your color palette, or just finding something that resembles the base orange. It doesn't need to be the exact same at all. And then we're going to outline all the bottom sections of the different elements that would be getting some lights. So in my case here, the bucket hat, that ridge is really quite long and it's right above the fire. So I'm just going to outline that bottom section really quickly. That might be a bit too thick. There we go. Then same thing with the saucer, it's definitely getting some of that nice light. So I'm going to outline the bottom line. Coming it slightly on the sides, as you can see. Because these are curved shapes, the light would kind of curve around a little bit as well. And I'm probably also going to outline, well, not probably, I'm also going to outline the top of the bottom because it is right next to the flame. Might add a little bit of light as well on the part of the handle that is not covered in glass. The side that is facing the fire, of course. And you could leave it like that, or we could go back in and add some extra highlights. So maybe going with a slightly bigger version of your brush. And honestly, here you can draw these however you want. I'm going to keep mine super simple. I'm just going to draw essentially straight lines that follow the different shapes. So starting with this kind of angular line on the top of my flying saucer, then bringing it on this button, so a bit more curved here. Bring it down on the cylinder, but the cylinder is smaller than the flying saucer, so this line is going to be slightly more towards the middle, like this. Then bringing it down on the bucket hat. The bucket hat, the top is curved, so it's going to be a bit of a curved line instead of something flat or straight. And then the flap of the bucket hat is angled as well, so it's going to be an angled line. So essentially, we're just going to repeat this kind of basic shape using different thicknesses. Maybe drawing one on the almost very edge of the lantern. Maybe drawing a super pale one that essentially just touches the top of every shape. I'm just experimenting here, as you can see. There's really no right or wrong way to do this. Yeah, I think that looks cool. And then I'm going to add one on the other side. So I'm focusing most of these highlights on one side, but I don't want to completely forget the other side. So I'm just going to draw something super simple on the left side as well. We're also going to draw some on the bottom. Now in my case, again, the bottom is super simple, so it's just going to be a case of drawing a few curved lines. And once you are done drawing them, no worries if you're not yet, I'm just going to tell you what you can do next. You can, just like we blended the shadows, you can blend them in by this time using your eraser because they're on a separate layer. And you can also play with the opacity of that layer until you find something you like. So I'm probably going to keep mine around 50 actually. I think that looked pretty good. But I'm going to come back in with my eraser, either setting it to the same pencil brush that you're using, or if you do have my illustration bundle, we're going to set it to the eraser shape instead of the sketching brush because it is made for the eraser. And just going very lightly over the part of your lights that would be in the shadow, because if they're in the shadow, they're not getting lights. So once more, feel free to pause the video here if you need a little bit more time to work on the lantern, and then we're going to move on to the glass part, which is still technically the lantern, but I'm going to separate it in a different chapter because, I don't know, it's kind of different. Okay, so once we have the lantern, we're going to move on to the glass, which is really going to completely transform the piece. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to map out the very edge of the glass with super bright colors, similarly to what we did for the little flame itself. So go ahead and create a new layer right above the glass layer you have. So it should be still below any lanterns layer you have. And rename that new layer to Glass Highlights. Now, similarly to what we did for the fire details, we're going to use a blending mode. If you do not have blending modes, don't worry, just go with a super bright orange. That's totally okay. And here, honestly, I think I'm going to start with color dodge as my blending mode, but once we have them painted on, we're going to just come back in and scroll through the list to see if there's something that we like more than color dodge. And again, just now so we can see a little bit better what we're doing, we're going to lower the opacity of the glass highlights layer around 50%, just so it's not as intense as, well, 100%. And here we're going to go back to a super bright color that we had in the fire, so honestly, any of these top two yellows could work well. I think I'm going to go with the middle one, and with a small version of our brush, pretty much the same one that we used, or same size roughly that we used for the flame, we're going to outline the sides of the glass. Great. Now once you do have the outlines, again, you can just come back in and scroll through the list to see if there is a blending mode that you like better. I think actually add probably looks the best. I was trying to use something else because I always use add, but if it works, it works. And probably going to set the opacity to, let's go with 60% in that area. Now, I had my glass layer more opaque than you because I wanted to make sure that you could see what I was drawing, but now that we have the outlines, I'm just going to come back in and lower the opacity of my glass layer. Yours should be fine, so you don't have to do that, but I'm going to set mine around 12%. And then still on the glass highlights layer, we're going to double the outline that we did here, essentially to add a bit of thickness to the glass. Now these lines, the ones that are inside, you might want to draw them a little bit thinner than the very edges, but they're going to be the exact same curve. Now, once we have these lines, we're going to add some reflections and some softer lights onto the glass, starting with the softer lights. So just go ahead and create a new layer, still below the lanterns, but above the glass highlights. And rename that new layer to glass lights. Same thing here, we're going to use a blending mode, but we want a slightly softer blending mode, although we could just go with add still, but even lower opacity. That being said, I think I'm going to start with soft light and opacity at 50% roughly for now. And we're going to start by drawing a thicker line, still the same kind of curve, on the bottom left side. And then right above that curve, we're going to draw a small oval. So it's going to look like this inverted exclamation mark. And then on the right, we're going to match the little oval we just did. So same thing here. Maybe a little bit longer, but not a whole lot. And then right above that, we're going to draw a small little dot. Now I feel like in my camera screen, these look pretty good, but on my iPad screen, they don't. So I'm just going to go back in and play with the blending mode. I'm really trying to find something else than add, but I have a feeling I'm going to go back to add. Actually, you know what? Screen. I think screen looks good. But I'm going to lower the opacity of them. So screen and 33% is what I'm going to go with, but again, feel free to just play with the different options you have and see what works best for you. Now from there, we're going to add some reflections of the fire on the glass, but we're going to draw those reflections behind everything so that they don't distract from the fire itself. So go ahead and create a new layer below the fire, but above handle and glow. And rename that new layer to Fire Reflections. Now these reflections, you probably know what I'm about to say. We're going to draw them in the same color as the fire because they're reflections of the fire. So the same super intense orange we've been using for most of the video. And we're going to be drawing these similar kind of pointy curves as we did for the top of the flame, but everywhere on the background. And if you have a lamp that is bulging out just like me, we're going to draw them in a bit of a U shape. If you have a lamp that is straight on the side, so more of a cylinder, you're going to draw them in roughly a straight line. And then you can fill in the entire bottom. Now once you have those drawn in, you can just go back and play with the different blending modes. Here we don't want something quite as bright, we mostly want that reddish orange color. So let's go, I think maybe color dodge. Nope, definitely not. Oh, overlay looks great. I'm gonna go with overlay, but just feel free to play with the list and see if there's something you prefer. Vivid light and linear light both look great as well, but I think I'm gonna stick with overlay. Am I? No, I'm lying. I'm gonna go with vivid light, but I'm going to lower the opacity of it a little bit. Not a whole lot, probably around 94%. And just like we did for the lights and shadows on the lantern itself, we might go back in with our eraser and erase some random lines in there, and just to make the reflections look a little bit more like reflections and just a flat color on the glass. Great. Now from there, we're also going to draw some burning fire, flame, ember things flying around to make the piece look even more magical and fun. And these you can draw them on the same layer as your fire details because we're going to draw them in the same color. But here, yes, just go back to whatever bright yellow color you're using in the color palette. This one at the very top of the left column. It doesn't need to be the exact same, but just a very bright yellow. And we're going to draw these round blobs, focusing them probably around the fire itself, but you could also have some stray ones floating above everything. Great. Now, once we have that, we're going to add a bit of glow around the fire and a little bit of glow to create a bit of a table under everything. But before that, we're going to erase the top of our glass just to amp up the effect of light and reflections. So just go back on your glass layer with your same eraser you've been using, setting it to probably a medium to big size. And if that's available to you, maybe lowering the opacity of your brush as well so that you can erase, or you have a little bit more control over what you erase, I should say. So if you're working in Procreate, the opacity of your brush and eraser is the slider right here, right under the brush size. So probably lowering that around, I don't know, 40–50%, really nothing precise here. And then just coming back in and erasing very, very lightly the top of your glass. And you can also come back in and erase that little section between the two highlights, which was the thickness of the glass. And in a similar vein, if you're feeling a little bit crazy, you can also go back and erase the top of the orange glow. So just going from the glass layer to the orange glow layer. But this one, you really want to make sure that you don't overdo it. So definitely lower the opacity of your eraser here. A lot, probably around 20%. And very gently just erase the top part of the glow that is within the glass. Now we're also going to create a glow around a flame, so just go ahead and create a layer below the fire but above the reflections. And rename that new layer to Flame Glow. Now for this glow, we're going to use the same banana yellow that we've been using in the last few steps. We're just going to focus that glow around the flame itself. It really does not need to be precise. Something like that is perfectly fine. And then just like we did for the orange glow, we're also going to add a bit of a gradient so that or a blur so that it creates a gradient. And so you can do that just by going in your adjustment panel if you're working in Procreate or anywhere that you have blur in your software and picking something like Gaussian blur. And here I'm going to go with less blur than I did, so probably more around 20–25% than the 40 which I did for the orange glow. And then once more, we can go ahead and add a blending mode just to amp up the light effect. And here, same thing as before, you can just scroll through the list until you find something you like. Add is always a good contender. But I'm still going to scroll to see if there's something better than add, although I don't think so. I'm going to go with add, but I'm going to lower the opacity again, probably around 75%. Now the last thing we're going to do is add a glow onto the table to make it look like the lantern is onto something. And then the table glow is going to be super easy to create. What we're going to do is we're just going to duplicate or create a copy of the orange glow we have, so the big one in the background. And to create a copy in Procreate, super easy. You just swipe your layer towards the left with one finger, and then you select duplicate. Then we're going to pick the bottom copy. And with any distortion tool we have, so in Procreate, the arrow tool here, set it to distort, but it might be a transform tool or something different for you. We're just going to take that glow and we're going to squish it from the top to the bottom. Now make sure you position it so that the oval is right under the base. And I unintentionally skewed mine, so I'm just going to bring it back in line. And then we're going to lower the opacity of this new layer because it is way too intense of a glow. So probably lowering it around 50%. And we're not quite done yet. We're also going to erase a little bit of that glow because if you think about it, yes, the light is creating this glow on the table, but because there is a solid base between the light and the table, there's going to be a bit of a shadow that is cast. So same thing, going back to the eraser, still making sure it is low opacity, but probably a medium or smaller brush this time, you're just going to very gently erase a little bit around the edges of the base. I'm already overdoing it, so this is something that you should keep subtle, but it's going to really help the piece look a little bit more realistic. Not that this is realistic in any way, but just a little bit better, I guess, a bit more professional. And there you go. Now, if you want to learn how to draw your own little kawaii monster in a bottle, I highly recommend you check out this video because it is super, super cute and it's entirely customizable, even more than this one, but it's still super easy. But before you leave, make sure to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the weekly videos I post every Tuesday and Saturday. Then click on the link right here, and I'll meet you there.